Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. You got really, I'm from the south side of Chicago, so this is going to be participatory or it's not going to be at all. Just a couple of things. I've got 5 grandkids now. 3 when we had to submit something. And I'm hoping for dozens. Just don't tell all my children that. I'm here to serve you. You're not here for me. My hope today is to probably talk in ways that might stimulate our mind together on how the church can provide help for the home, especially homes that are just starting out, and many parents without any Christian conviction or upbringing. So I'm thinking around preschool and grade school in this particular session. My desire is to speak for about 25 minutes and then field as many questions as possible so that it might be useful to what you would have in mind rather than simply something that I'm saying from the front. Let me say that by way of preliminary comment, this is the core of who I am, the scriptures for the 6-year-old. Everything I've done in my life really comes back to this fundamental, elemental, foundational moment in life. And so I don't travel for anything anymore other than meeting with preachers and Bible teachers on equipping them to do the word for their congregations. But when the invitation came from this conference to talk about children, then I got on a plane. So I'm happy to be here. We'll see if you're happy at 2 o'clock. But just think, even if it's terrible, you'll be done by 2 o'clock. If I had the ability to put an image before you or to paint a picture that holds where I'm going to go over the next 25 minutes, simply envision a circle. And within the circle, the word culture. And it would stand then for a desire to create a culture in which the people of God are establishing the households of God's family in ways that are productive in introducing them to Jesus and to life under the word of Christ. Culture. How does one create culture? I want to walk around that circle with 4 arrows that move in one sense from 12 to 3, 3 to 6, 6 to 9, 9 to 12. This is just anecdotal by nature. But culture is really a derivative of things that are internally held. So culture is revealed over time as much as it is created. It's something you take up, not something you necessarily make up. You recast it, but you don't create it. You have it or you don't. And so with that understanding, though, how does one create a church culture that will be a manifestation of who we really are to begin with? I guess I want to say on this whole area of raising kids for Christ and providing help for the home, that culture originates from 12 to 3 in convictions. Just turn to 1 Timothy 3. This is instructive for me. in regard to our subject, where having laid out the qualifications for overseers, Paul then writes, I hope to come to you soon, verse 14, but I am sure that these things, I am writing these things so that if I delay, you may know how one ought to behave in the household of God, which is the church of the living God, a pillar and buttress of the truth. There's our understanding then of the church at a imagistic or a level of idea. It's a household. The church is a family. It's God's family. But it says here that the church then is a buttress, literally in one sense. The church itself is that which is a pillar of truth. Now, we normally think of the church resting upon the truth of Jesus. But here Paul is saying that truth is resting upon the buttress of the family, God's family. It's an interesting way to think about it. Think of Notre Dame, just the image in your mind. What is it that, in a sense, kept the walls up at some level while it burns? It is that which buttressed it, which yet still makes it visible to the world today. And that's what he's saying, that the role of the church is to hold up truth, which contains or is known as God's very household. Now, by way of conviction, then, it's interesting that in the immediate literary context, preceding context, when he's talking about officers of elder and deacon, they both have a relationship to the household of God and the homes within that household. So in verse 4, he must manage his own household well with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church? Or in verse 12, let the deacon be of one husband, one wife, managing their children and their own households well. This is my conviction about raising kids for Christ and the role of the church in providing help for the home. If the church is God's household, and if that household holds up and makes manifest God's truth in the world, it should not surprise us that it is only as strong as the individual homes comprised in it. So raising kids for Christ, providing help to the home, is a generational conviction of ensuring that God will be known in the world. So this is just something that's been embedded in me and informs so much. I don't know how you create a culture of raising kids for Christ and of providing help to the home unless you understand the supreme place of what is going on in your home and in my home and the impact that has for the household of God and the implication that has for truth being known in the world. So there's a conviction. Now I'm just going to speak anecdotally. Our church, when we started 22 years ago, we farmed out a question to all the people and asked if we all had to go to a deserted island. Gosh, wouldn't that be nice now here? A deserted island, and we couldn't take anything with us. Nevertheless, what would come with us? And 7 things emerged in our own congregation. One of them was the significance of family. It just was part of who we were. We said back then in the late 90s, God designed the family to be integral to the structure and well-being of society. What is more, the Bible teaches, while the truth of the gospel rests upon strong churches, the health of the church is directly connected to the character and godliness of its individual members and homes. Therefore, we desire to help people in our city build strong homes and families for God. Conviction. This is what's there for me? What would help you raise kids for Christ? An internal conviction that the house comes down if this isn't our highest aim. So I've given my life to children, really, to young families. Following conviction, though, is commitments. Let me just say a couple things anecdotally as this conviction is worked out in our church. We make much of infant dedications. I'm sorry, I'm a Presbyterian, of infant baptisms. But either way, I hope you'll be okay with me today. I'm glad Dr. Piper was willing to invite a Presbyterian to the work. We make much of these. This happened for me at an experiential level when I was in seminary and I was visiting a church, and the pastor, every time there was an infant being dedicated in the household of God, he took the child in his own arms and he walked the child through the congregation, speaking of the child's name. And I've adopted that same practice. And I always say to the child, you are loved by God. You will be adored by this church. So the conviction of my life is working its way out into ordinary commitments that are carried forth in the life of our church. We tell our parents that outside of making their own election and calling sure, I'm quoting an old Presbyterian, outside of making your own election and calling sure, raising your children is the greatest task for which you are kept alive by God. To it, all war, all politics, all money-making ought to be subordinated, and every parent ought to feel each hour of the day that this is their task on earth. I actually want that kind of commitment to emerge not just in the life of a parent, but to imbibe the context of an entire church. And how do you do that as a church? Well, you begin to make commitments. One thing we've done is we wrote a little benediction prayer, gift from the Lord, gift from the Lord. And every child in our congregation, when they are presented in the church, the whole congregation sings this benediction over them. Gift from the Lord, gift from the Lord, may all your days be blessed. Gift from the Lord, gift from the Lord, God's favor on you rest. Now, I've been in the same church now for 22 years. For 22 years, every child in infancy, the congregation has sung this benediction over them. I know it's a little odd, but these commitments come. There's always a gift, even from our children, to the child. There's this book out called the Big Picture Story Bible, and we wrap it up, and one of the children presents it. We are just doing small commitment things that are telling parents, this is your charge, and we are with you in this. We covenant with them. Let me say this. If you want to help raise children for Christ and you want to know the role the church can help, I'm just saying anecdotally, I didn't know it at the time, but our first intern, before we even had a church, we had an intern, and they were devoted to children's ministry. Now, this is from a guy who's committed to raising up pastor teachers and expositors of the word. Our first intern, before we began, was in children's ministry. There are commitments that follow convictions. And there are many things in your own life that you could just ask yourself creatively, what commitments can we make that actually reveal the conviction that we hold? If you visit our church with a young family, there are people there to meet you and walk you to the right classes, because that's important to us, that there's a gift bag that you are given, not in any sense to market, but we're well aware that parents need help in regard to what to do, and we want to put something into their hands. We are recently launching a building campaign in the midst of trying to raise $10.5 million. And I didn't do it, I didn't understand it until in retrospect, but we had to ask ourselves, how will we launch a campaign to raise $10.5 million? We did it with our children. We had these little banks, and we drew a place from where we're meeting. This was happening through our children's director, all the way 0.8 of a mile to where our building will be. And they asked the question, how many pennies would you have to lay down next to each other to be able to walk from where we are now to where we will be? I can't remember the number of pennies. It's like astronomical. And we launched a $10.5 million campaign by having all of the children flood their way forward to gather little paper banks to begin putting pennies in, so that when we do a commitment Sunday, our children will actually be giving the first fruits. These are just commitments that are there. Conviction, commitments, creativity. How do you raise kids for Christ? Creativity. Every year there ought to be something new that someone, many of you, are creating for the welfare of the families and children in your own church. Whether they ever become published, who cares? There needs to be a fresh, ongoing, faucet, never turning off display of creativity and resources that are given to young families to assist their work in the home, whether that's through family worship or through readings or catechizing, whatever you want to call it. There needs to be new resources continually given. Why? Because your families change, because resources are limited in their availability. But the churches that are actually creative are the ones that are revealing the conviction of those commitments. This is interesting because he mentioned the Big Picture Story Bible, which fascinatingly was done because we were committed to writing a devotional that families would do around their dinner table that would take you through the whole story of the Bible, late 90s. We did the devotional. We handed it out, had never had any intention of publishing it. We stuck it in things like this, and we had it all typewritten. I think we had computers back then. And we told our parents, sit down with your kids 3 days a week. Now you need to know my guys. My guys they're not Bethlehem guys. They're not going to do devotion 7 days a week. I'd be glad if I could get my guy to do his family 3 days a week and expose them to the Bible. So we didn't want all our people to feel like they were failing. So we said 3 days a week, whether it's 3 minutes or 10 minutes, sit down with your kids, read this passage, read this paragraph, ask these 2 questions, and we will lead you what we think is one way to tell the whole story. When we did it and we implemented it, in about a month and a half, we had 6 families, about 6 families, no more than that. 6 families say, it's great, but it's going over the head of my preschooler. So I said, well, let me see if we can dumb it down. So I went to work trying to create, in the 3 readings, simpler language. I had a woman in my church, Gail Schoonmaker. She's an artist. I said, I'll tell you what, you do a little outline of a drawing. When they come to church on Sunday, the curriculum that we're writing will reinforce what's going in the home, because the church is actually going to reinforce the dinner table. And at least a kid that's 3 years old or 4 years old will have something to color. And that's where the Big Picture Story Bible came from. She has 4 children. The oldest is severely autistic. After about 3 months of this, she said, I think I want to paint these. She began to paint them. She came into me and showed them to me, and I said, this is amazing. I mean, this is really something. And we showed it to a publisher, and they wanted to do it. Crossway. And that thing called the Big Picture Story Bible was a back-end product meant to help 6 families with preschoolers who needed 3 extra minutes at a dinner table because what we were doing wasn't being effective. Now it's in like 26 languages. I laugh. Like, are you kidding me? So if God has tucked you away in some obscure, quiet little place, all you got to do is be creative in regard to helping the people that are in front of you. Let me put it to you this way. The local church is the sphere of your ministry. It is never to be a platform for your ministry. Anything I've ever published was a derivative of that which was trying to help deficiencies within our own church. That's just the way it worked for us. We had no desire to make some massive contribution that I could lobby my way into publishers' offices. 6 families with preschoolers, creativity within the own church, believing that God had given us everything to do for our families. And so we keep creating. We're just always creating. Creativity is so necessary to help people on their way to Christ. Now, eventually, that little devotional, which was what we tried first, did get printed as a family devotional. And then eventually we had a dream to do something else about systematic theology, and we self-published stuff. And then eventually that became a devotional. But we've got all kinds of stuff that we do in our church that have never been published, and I don't think probably will be published, but we're always creating. So a couple of years ago, we did a 12-week devotional that takes a kid through Daniel. I mean, unbelievable. We tackled chapters 7 through 12 for the 6-year-old. That's insane. But here it is. We're constantly creating. And it doesn't matter to me where it goes. In fact, the great joy in church life is that you, the teacher, the children's worker, the parent, you learn so much by just engaging yourself in the process. And so it's been a wonderful thing for our church family to be disproportionately used given our size and stature in the area of children's ministry. But I just want to say that the creativity is critical to creating culture. It doesn't have to be the best material out there. It can be bad material. But if it's your material, it's good. I mean, I hope you understand me on this. It doesn't have to be ready. It just has to be effectively at work. Here's another conviction. The best material that will help us all raise kids for Christ and provide help to home, the best material, guess what? It hasn't been written yet. Hasn't been written yet. And some of the best material that might have already been written hasn't been published. Might not ever be published. But that's what makes the church strong. Creativity is so critical, it seems to me, that I just want to mention we're doing a project right now. We decided to tackle church history by way of a family devotional. Are there other devotions out on church history? Absolutely. Are there books out on church history? Wonderful things are available on church history. But have we been able to articulate what we think for our kids? No, we haven't done it yet. We've done biblical theology, the plot line of the Bible, the big picture. We've done systematic theology, big beliefs. We haven't done anything on historical theology. This is a 22-year dream. And right now, our whole congregation, we sent out emails to 20, 30 people. Do you want to help write a family devotional that's simply being used for our own families to introduce them to the idea of church history and what God has done, what we're calling big events? And right now, people are missing their deadlines in writing. And it'll take us a little longer. But believe me, within about 12 months, we will hand a computer-generated thing on white paper, stapled in the office, to a family and say, here's part 1 of 7. Get underway. We hope the writers will keep moving. And we'll see what happens. Creativity. Culture. I don't know of culture without creativity. Finally, then, would be continued effort. Culture is built by persistence. It's continued effort. I will never stop. Our church will never stop trying to find the next way to make some productive investment into the lives of our children. And it'll be persistent. And all of a sudden the decades go by and someone is strengthened. You know, they talk a lot now about how kids, when they leave for college and then they all walk away from the church, we're actually not finding that from our own local church. I don't know if it's, believe me, it's the grace of God. But we're actually finding that we, over 22 years now, we actually do have a church that does have a conviction, that works its way out through ordinary commitments, that is always invested in being creative, and will be continuing in their effort to do it. These are some things that I think I wanted to share with you. What I'd love to do, though, is to allow some of those things to just spur some things from you that maybe we could interact on. And I would love to spend the next 13 minutes just anecdotally responding to things that you've come here. You might have had an expectation that you walked in that door with, and this halftime moment, you're like, this dude has not touched 1 second on the expectation I walked in here that this seminar was supposed to fulfill. And so let's give it a shot. I've shared a few things with you. I think the second half might be more productive hearing some things from you. Yes, sir.
One of the challenges we found in our church is there seems to be such a focus on ourselves as adults, and that has led to our children's ministry really having a struggle. We recently hired somebody who I think is doing a marvelous job with what she's been given, but we just don't have a commitment from our congregation toward children. How can we go about reshaping that?
So the question is, how do we reshape or grow a whole commitment from the church toward children, as opposed to kind of the adults are here for the adult things? One of the things that I think might be interesting there is the difference between the way the world works and the way I think the church could work. We do it like this. So my answer to your question is this. So the world works along specialization and segmentation. The adults are here, the senior citizens are here, the young marrieds are here, the single people are here, the 3-year-old is there, and then we hire staff positions to infiltrate all those specialized and segmented worlds. That's just the way the world works. But there ought to be something in your church that maybe you could productively not challenge that framework, but actually go, you know what happens if we organize a few things in church that are this way? What happens if we actually cut across the grain of all those segmented worlds and actually find people in the same place at the same time? I'll give you an example. We have a monthly prayer meeting. I was just there last night. I didn't think anyone would be there because there was a football game going on. And I thought, man, it's going to be difficult. I'm going to open the door. I'm going to keep the lights on. There's going to be me there and like one elder. The place was packed. I was shocked. We had to get out more chairs. It was like one of our best attended prayer meetings. I don't know. Maybe our people don't like football. But in my group at one moment, there was a 5th grade boy, an 8th grade girl, because parents often bring their kids with. And we were praying, and adults are praying, and adults are praying. And then I realized this 5th grader hadn't said a word, probably intimidated out of his mind. I mean, who wants to be at a prayer meeting in 5th grade? But the leader, the elder, had sent out a list, and one of the things, all of a sudden it had like 8 bullet points to pray for. And I just seized the moment. I just said, Matthew, choose one of those bullet points, and you launch us in on this. You just tell God whatever you want about that, and you take it for us, and then we'll come in right behind you. And the little kid started to pray. Okay, so adults do adult things because we live in specialized and segmented worlds. Find some avenue in your church to work not towards specialization and segmentation, but generalization and integration. Find some ways to start exploring that concept. There was a guy in here just before me, Tony, who does stuff on prayer, and he actually does intergenerational prayer. He's got some really cool stuff. Look him up on the speaker list, and that might be some other ways to begin to do that. Yep, someone else, and that's just one idea. We're not going to be comprehensive. Yep. Who's next? Yes, sir.
I would say in our church that parents are pretty intimidated by the idea of talking to their kids about God and the Bible, even in their own homes.
Yeah.
And of course that comes out of their own talking about God, but it's just not something they do, and so then it feels so artificial. How would you encourage a parent like that?
So the question is, how do you encourage a parent where it's so unfamiliar to talk to your children about God at all? I think this is where resources are most helpful. And you have to think, if you're creating something for your church or you're looking for curriculum, you actually have to get down to the point where you say, as a parent or whatever, read this passage. Read this paragraph to your children out loud. Ask this question. Because they're not going to self-generate it. They're not going to self-generate it. So just show them that this is the way it works. Another thing that might help there is hospitality with some of your families that are more mature. So if hospitality is in play, there's a lot of people now, because I'm old, I'm 58 and got 5 grandkids, they'll actually tell me that they do in their home what they had never seen modeled, but they saw it modeled at our dinner table. So they saw Dad sit at the end of the dinner table and say, now children, I want to look you up, before we eat dinner, I want to look you all in the eye. I want to see you. And I would do this to my kids, my poor kids. And I would look them right in the eye. And then I would tell them, I love you. I don't know where you've been today. We're back to the dinner table. You're safe here. We'll have some nice conversation. And then we'll talk about God a little bit tonight. And so then all of a sudden, people in the church are being invited. They're just part of our dinner. They saw this for the first time. So hospitality and modeling is going to be critical for a new generation of young parents who have no background of a father or a mother or even a parental figure providing any space. So find that. It might be a thing. And I'll just tell you one thing about my wife. So we light candles. She's lit a candle over the dinner table every night for 36 years. Candles, they burn down, but it's an inexpensive luxury. It's like pistachios. You just got to have them. It's a poor man's luxury. You're always going to have pistachios in my house, and if you come for dinner, there's a candle lit. And what that has done is it's just created the dinner table is where we are going to talk about God. The dinner table is where we're here. I had to force myself, even as a pastor, to keep a Bible next to my seat at the dinner table, or I would blow it off and not talk about God. I had to do the same thing with my wife. I had to put myself finally where I put like Spurgeon's morning and evening devotional, which my wife and I read this morning even over the phone. It sits on the kitchen counter table, and if it's not there while we're drinking coffee, if it wasn't there, I don't know that we'd actually talk about God. So, whatever crutches you need to verbalize God, find it and exercise it, and don't feel guilty if you don't carry it out every day. Yep, let's hear 5 or 6, 7 more quick ones. Yes, sir.
Do you do anything different with staff structure for a church, or suggest anything that would help emphasize this kind of culture as opposed to the traditional youth pastor, kids pastor, or anything like that?
The question is one of staff culture, and do we do anything different there? I will say that our children's director is with us every Monday morning, and when we go over the sermon that's 3 or 4 weeks up, that individual is completely engaged. I guess one of the things I would say is, and this is especially true for youth ministry, cultivate a church where the senior pastor doesn't just think you're a youth pastor, or children's director, but that you are here as part of the leadership of the whole. I had a wonderful mentor in this through Kent Hughes. He wanted everyone on staff to be growing, developing, and part of shaping the whole. So our children's ministry actually helps shape what we do and how we frame it. And if they're left out of that, then I don't think that will ever emerge. We've only heard from men so far, but we'll hear from another one. Yes, sir.
Just wondering, maybe it's along that line, but like in our culture today, where there's so much focus on like have all these programs, because that's what's going to attract people, right? We can get caught in
Yeah.
thinking, okay, the children's ministry is one other place, and my kids are all that.
Yeah.
In sort of what you're saying, and trying to fight against that, how do you try to move in that direction?
Yeah.
Really
So.
focusing on kids, but creating that culture.
Yeah, so what's the role of programming, both positively and negatively, in being able to do this? Just remember this. Programs are simply a way of structuring relationships. That's what a program does. A program structures relationships. So I'm not against programs. But I do understand that in programs, some people can think that the program actually then is accomplishing what needs to happen. And that's not really the case. Programs don't do that in and of themselves. One philosophical move that might help is that whatever the church is doing programmatically for kids is actually reinforcing, not substituting, but reinforcing what we're trying to do in homes. So if you look at the kind of stuff we've created, it's all stuff that takes place in the home. And even in the home, you then would go to church, and the Sunday school hour was reinforcing the dinner table, not the other way around. This is especially important in youth ministry. It's especially important in large churches where families begin to farm out their kids to the church rather than be particularly vested in their role. So here's what the scriptures say, and we say it to every parent. The home is the primary place for nurture and instruction. The home. You get it from Deuteronomy, you get it from Ephesians. So both from the Old Testament and the New, the home is the primary place for the instruction of children. We will help you in that context. And then let your programming assist and support, but never feel that that's the outsourced way forward. And a lot of parents need to be told this. A lot of parents need to be told the church is not a substitute for what you're to do. So quit farming your kid out to us thinking that we're going to do your job. So you don't want to say that to them or they'll. Somebody else. Yes. Yes, ma'am. Yep. Great. So the question is programming for children, but when does one begin to utilize children within programming in a healthy way? I don't know how that happens in large churches, but this doubling back is really an element of discipleship that's important. Discipleship isn't just linear. You don't just take someone from A to Z and they're now mature. What happens really in discipleship is there is this doubling back where people are reinvesting in people behind them. So for us, our youth, there are many of them that are involved in our children's ministry. There's actually kids that are actually their teachers' helpers in Sunday school. So you'll have a kid that is maybe in 6th grade, and once a month, he is supporting teachers during a different educational hour, and our teachers are utilizing them. I think you raise a really good point. I think the same is true in youth ministry. I think you're developing senior leadership teams that make an investment in younger ages is something that can be done. Now, I don't know what that might mean for your context, but I'm affirming your idea of saying, how do kids actually engage in the health and life of the church, and what might that look like in your context? 2 more? Yes.
David, are you guys using catechesis, and if so, what does it look like on a given week?
So you guys, meaning, yeah. So we do. So I've written a number of different tools, strategies to help a parent help their children memorize. So we will do that. So for instance, here's a children's catechism that we've put out, and on the end of each one, there are 3 questions that we're working on memory. So we're working on memory work. The big picture story Bible, which emerged out of a failed attempt at a big picture devotional, was actually originated in a 45-question catechism that tried to tell the whole story. And I didn't want to just answer questions. I wanted the answers to be Bible verses themselves. So how does the Bible tell itself? I did it in 45 questions. I just met with a guy here. You probably all know him. He did it in 16 verses that tell the whole story. That would be a great way to do it. But, that just tells you. I wrote the long paper. Other people are writing the short paper. Short paper is always better. And someone will get it down to 1, and then we'll all be really happy. Last question. Come on, you had some expectation, and you're like, dude, you have not hit it. Yes, all right, front row, take it.
I don't know where you go with this.
I'll go quickly.
I have a 10-year-old who's grown up in church, obviously pastor's family, yet he's struggling, kind of crisis of faith. He's just really struggling to believe. What do you tell a 10-year-old?
What do you tell a 10-year-old in the midst of crisis of faith? That's a really good one to finish on. Not all doubts have heresy underneath them. Let me put it this way. The actual report card on your child is not known by age 10. So you haven't failed. In fact, you can do all the right things, but it isn't until the Lord is pleased to reveal Christ in them and to them that anything of spiritual import might look to take place. So free yourself from this methodological chain that feels like if I can have the conviction and I make the commitment and I get creative and I continue at it, that my kids are going to have it all. I would say not only by 10, maybe not by 20, maybe not by 30, maybe not by 40. So there's principles that are in play for your children. They're not promises in that way. But never give up on your child. Never. Never give up on your child. And free yourself from the notion that at age 10 years old, you're in a bad way. Yeah. So culture, I think culture emerges. It's not made. And so you really have to ask yourself, what are my convictions? How do those convictions manifest themselves into commitments that our church is making? Are those commitments wedded to real creativity where our church is the sphere of what we're doing? And are we willing to continue at it? Thanks for being here. May God bless you. Let me pray for you. Our Heavenly Father, so many of us, we long to see a generation of young children love you and serve the church well. We know your church depends on this. So be with each one here whose heart is heavy. And we ask, Lord, for your grace and encouragement and comfort. Be with each one here who is eager to make an investment. And may they understand that 3 families in front of them may be worth all the effort they pour into them. We long to see your church made strong. Do so through the lives of our children. In Jesus' name, amen.